There comes a moment in every empath's journey when something quietly, but permanently, shifts inside them. It does not happen loudly. It does not happen dramatically. It happens the way winter slowly becomes spring, one invisible degree at a time. This stage is what I call the dangerous final stage of the empath. Not dangerous for the empath, dangerous for anyone who believed that their kindness was weakness. You see, throughout life, the empath absorbs what others avoid. They carry emotions that are not theirs. They forgive wounds that were never apologized for. They stay silent in places where they should have been protected. But the human soul has a threshold, and Jung taught that the moment you become fully aware of your shadow, you can no longer be manipulated by it or by anyone who tries to feed it. This final stage begins when the empath realizes that the pain they carried was never a burden, it was a mirror showing them how deeply they feel, how deeply they love, and how deeply they deserve to be treated. The empath stops explaining, stops proving, stops fixing, and instead, they begin observing. Their silence becomes sharper than their words. Their absence becomes louder than their presence. Their boundaries become sacred, not negotiable. Now the empath is no longer a soft target for emotional predators. They no longer fall for the promises of the narcissist, the guilt of the manipulator, or the chaos of the wounded. They see everything clearly. They understand motives before the words are even spoken. They sense the lie before it is told. And this clarity is what makes them dangerous, not because they hurt others, but because no one can hurt them the same way ever again. This is the stage where the empath finally becomes whole, not by abandoning their sensitivity, but by protecting it fiercely. They no longer love blindly. They love wisely. They no longer give endlessly. They give intentionally. And they no longer lose themselves for others. They choose themselves first, without guilt, without apology. This is the final evolution of the empath. Not soft, not broken, but awakened. The breaking point. There comes a moment in an empath's life where something begins to fracture softly inside them. Not dramatically, not violently, but with the quiet authority of truth finally rising to the surface. This is what I call the breaking point. It is not the collapse of the empath. It is the collapse of their illusions. For years, the empath carries the emotional weight of others, believing this is love, believing this is loyalty, believing this is their purpose. They give beyond their capacity, often without being asked, because their instinct is to heal whatever is wounded around them. But no human being is designed to hold everyone else's pain forever. And so, the breaking point arrives. The weight becomes too heavy. This heaviness does not come because the empath is fragile. It comes because their inner self, their deeper psychological core, begins to rebel. Jung said that when we violate our true nature, the psyche sends warnings. Quiet at first, then louder. The empath begins to feel exhausted in situations that once felt effortless. They feel drained by conversations that once felt meaningful. Their intuition grows restless, as if whispering, "Something is wrong here. You are giving what is not being reciprocated." This is not weakness. This is the soul saying, "Enough." They start to see patterns, and slowly clarity forms. The empath begins asking questions that they avoided for years. Why am I always the one who cares more? Why do I attract people who drain me? Why do I keep saving those who do not wish to change? These questions are not complaints. They are awakenings. Every therapist, every psychologist, every mystic knows that true transformation begins the moment you question your own patterns. Before this stage, the empath lives reactively, responding to others' needs, emotions, crises, chaos, and desires. But at the breaking point, the empath finally turns inward, and this inward gaze is powerful. It is dangerous. It is liberating, because the moment an empath starts to question, they begin to see. This is not anger. It is awareness. Most people mistake this stage for anger. They say the empath has become distant, cold, detached. But Jung understood that awareness often looks like anger to those who benefited from your unconsciousness. The empath is not angry. They are awake. They are beginning to recognize the truth. They were not chosen because they are easy to love. They were chosen because they are easy to use. This realization feels heavy at first, almost unbearable, but with time, it becomes the foundation of strength, because once you see the pattern, you can no longer remain inside it blindly. The empath stops overgiving. At the breaking point, something else begins to shift. Where they once volunteered themselves emotionally, they now hesitate. Where they once absorbed everyone else's storms, they now ask, is this mine to carry? This is a profound moment in psychological development. The empath realizes that not every wound is theirs to heal. Not every person is theirs to save. Not every broken soul is their responsibility. The empath begins to understand boundaries, not as walls, but as truth. The transformation begins. Jung taught that consciousness is the first step toward wholeness. And now, the empath begins that journey. They start valuing their peace more than their role as a rescuer. They start valuing their energy more than their image as a good person. They start valuing themselves not for how much they give, but for who they truly are. The breaking point is not an ending. It is a birth, a rebirth of identity, a rebirth of self-respect, a rebirth of inner strength. This is the moment the empath stops being a passive receiver of life and becomes an active creator of their own boundaries, choices, and emotional destiny. They no longer fall into people's chaos. They observe it. They no longer sacrifice themselves for love. They choose love that requires no sacrifice. They no longer chase those who walk away. They stand still and let absence reveal truth. The breaking point is the beginning of power. This is where the empath begins their transformation from a sensitive soul into a conscious, grounded, wise being. Their heart remains gentle, but their spirit becomes unshakable. They no longer give blindly. They give consciously. They no longer lose themselves. They return to themselves. This is the breaking point. Not destruction, reconstruction. Not the fall, the awakening. The awakening. The awakening of an empath is not a sudden explosion of insight. It does not arrive like lightning. It unfolds slowly, quietly, like dawn spreading across a silent landscape. When an empath reaches this stage, something remarkable begins to happen. They stop absorbing emotions and begin observing them. For most empaths, life is a constant exchange of energy. They feel what is not theirs. They carry what was never meant for them. They merge so deeply with the emotional world around them that their own inner world becomes blurred, neglected, even forgotten. But awakening is the moment the empath learns a sacred truth. Sensitivity is not a curse. Unconscious sensitivity is. The shift from absorption to awareness. Until now, the empath responded automatically. If someone cried, they felt the pain. If someone was angry, they felt the tension. If someone was broken, they felt the urgency to fix, heal, rescue. But awakening creates a quiet distance. Not emotional distance, but psychological clarity. The empath begins to notice emotions the way one watches the ocean. Waves rising, waves falling, but the observer remains on the shore. They no longer drown, they witness. This shift is profound. It marks the moment the empath steps out of unconscious compassion and into conscious love. Compassion is no longer self-sacrifice. Before awakening, the empath confused two very different things. Compassion, self-sacrifice. They believed that loving others meant losing themselves. They believed that caring meant carrying. They believed that being kind meant being available to everyone. Awakening ends this illusion. The empath sees that true compassion is not giving all of yourself. It is giving from a place that does not drain you. They learn that love is not attachment. Love is not saving someone from their own lessons. Love is not accepting mistreatment in the name of understanding. Love is awareness. Love is presence. Love is truth. No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Jung's words become the doorway through which the empath must pass. Because awakening is not only light, it is descent. The empath must travel downward, into the very places they avoided within themselves. Their suppressed anger, their unmet needs, their buried disappointments. their unheard voice. These were the emotions they ignored, because they were too busy taking care of others. But now, the unconscious demands to be seen. The shadow rises not to punish, but to complete. Facing the shadow, this descent is painful, not because the shadow is dangerous, but because it is honest. The empath sees how often they abandoned themselves, how often they remained silent to keep peace, how often they put themselves last, how often they accepted less than they deserved, because kindness was their identity. In this stage, the empath finally understands you cannot be whole while rejecting half of yourself. So they meet their anger and realize it is a signal, not a flaw. They meet their needs and realize they matter as much as anyone else's. They meet their voice and realize it has been waiting years to speak. This meeting is the true awakening, the rise of inner power. Once the empath embraces these forgotten parts of themselves, something extraordinary begins to rise within them. Not loud, not aggressive, not dramatic, but deeply, quietly centered. A new form of strength emerges, a strength that does not seek approval, does not fear rejection, does not depend on being needed. It is the strength of someone who finally knows themselves. The awakened empath does not stop feeling. They feel even more deeply, but now they know which feelings are theirs and which belong to the world around them. They no longer rush to fix. They no longer shrink to please. They no longer stay where their soul feels unsafe. Their boundaries are calm, not reactive. Their presence is grounded, not overwhelmed. Their love is conscious, not compulsive. They are no longer guided by wounds. They are guided by wisdom. This is the awakening. It is not becoming harder. It is becoming clearer. It is not losing sensitivity. It is mastering it. It is not becoming distant. It is becoming whole. This is the stage where the empath becomes their truest self, not a vessel for others, but a guardian of their own light. The awakening is the moment they return home, to themselves, the dangerous stage. There is a moment in the empath's journey when everything changes, not on the outside, but within. A quiet shift, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to alter the entire trajectory of their life. This is the stage many call dangerous, but not because the empath becomes harmful. It is dangerous because the empath becomes fully conscious. For most of their life, the empath navigates the world with an open heart and unguarded intuition. They see the good first, forgive too quickly, and explain away what hurts them. Their compassion becomes a doorway through which unhealthy people enter easily. But awakening transforms compassion into clarity, kindness into discernment, sensitivity into inner authority. This is where the danger begins, not to the empath, but to anyone who relied on their unconscious giving. They stop being easy to manipulate. The most striking change in this stage is not loud rebellion. It is quiet refusal. The empath's energy, once porous, becomes grounded. Their attention, once scattered across everyone else's chaos, returns to themselves. Their heart, once wide open, develops a sacred gate. Suddenly, emotional manipulation loses its power. Guilt no longer works. Silent treatment loses its effect. Drama no longer hooks them. The empath sees the pattern, and because they see it, they cannot be controlled by it. Jung often taught that the moment you gain consciousness, you remove the strings others once pulled. This is why the empath becomes dangerous. They cannot be lied to in the same way anymore. They see through masks. During this stage, the empath's perception sharpens, not through effort, but through awareness. What they once excused, they now understand. What they once tolerated, they now identify. What once confused them now becomes obvious. They sense intentions before words are spoken. They feel the energy behind actions. They understand the subtext beneath conversations. People who operate through manipulation, ego, or emotional hunger find themselves exposed in the presence of an awakened empath. Not because the empath confronts them, but because the empath sees them. And being seen is the one thing the manipulator fears most. They can walk away. Before this stage, the empath remains attached to situations long after their soul has left. They stay because they believe love can fix what wounds have broken. They stay because they confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. They stay because they see potential instead of reality. But in the dangerous stage, something remarkable happens. The empath can finally walk away, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. They leave behind the relationships that drain them, the environments that suffocate them, the people who only take but never transform. Walking away becomes an act of self-respect, not abandonment. They stop bleeding for those who refuse to heal. This stage teaches the empath one of the most important truths of their life. You cannot heal someone who is committed to their wounds. You cannot save someone who benefits from being broken. You cannot guide someone who does not wish to see the path. And so the empath stops pouring themselves into bottomless cups. They stop giving emotional CPR to people who are emotionally absent. They stop believing that love alone can transform someone who chooses not to grow. Their compassion becomes conscious, no longer automatic, no longer blind. They choose who deserves their energy and who merely consumes it. Their boundaries become clear. Before awakening, boundaries felt unnatural to the empath. Too harsh, too cold, too selfish. But now, boundaries become a form of spiritual truth, a way of honoring their energy, a way of preserving their light. Their no becomes firm. Their yes becomes intentional. Their silence becomes powerful. Silence, especially, shifts from being a sign of hurt to a sign of wisdom. They no longer argue to be understood. They simply step back and let people reveal themselves. Narcissists fear this stage. Those who once controlled the empath through flattery, chaos, or guilt feel the shift immediately. The empath they fed on, the empath who gave endlessly, forgave endlessly, carried endlessly, is no longer available. The emotional access has been revoked. The psychic doors have closed. The cycle has ended, not with a fight, but with awakening. This is why the dangerous stage is feared. The empath becomes someone who cannot be controlled, not because they harden, but because they become whole. This is their true evolution. Calm, grounded, centered, clear. Their heart still feels deeply. Their intuition still senses everything. But now, wisdom guides their sensitivity. They are no longer a vessel for others. They are the guardian of their own soul. This is the dangerous stage. The stage where the empath finally becomes powerful. In the quietest, purest, most undeniable way. The integration. The final stage of the empath's evolution is not rebellion. It is not anger. It is not the rejection of who they once were. It is a return, a quiet, powerful return to the self. Throughout their journey, the empath walked through extremes, carrying pain that was not theirs, absorbing emotions that never belonged to them, healing wounds they did not create. They believed this made them good, noble, compassionate, but in truth, it only distanced them from their own inner life. Integration is the moment they finally come home. It is the stage where all the fragments of their identity, the sensitive child, the wounded helper, the unconscious giver, the awakening soul, come together into a single, grounded presence. The empath realizes something profound. Healing others was never their burden to carry. For years, they acted like a silent caretaker of the world's pain. They felt responsible for fixing those who did not fix themselves, for saving those who refused to rise, for giving what no one ever truly appreciated. But now, clarity replaces obligation. They understand that every soul has its own path. Every person has their own wounds. Every individual has their own timing, their own lessons, their own darkness to face. And the empath finally steps back, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom, becoming who they truly are. At this stage, a deeper Jungian truth begins to unfold within them. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the first time, the empath sees themselves not as someone who must serve, but as someone who must be. Not a caretaker, not a savior, not an emotional sponge, not the one who absorbs the world's pain. Instead, they recognize their true identity, a conscious being who chooses where their energy flows. Their empathy becomes intentional, not instinctive. Their love becomes wise. not self-sacrificial. Their presence becomes grounded, not scattered. They no longer give out of fear of being unloved. They give from a place of fullness, not depletion. They no longer rescue people to feel valuable. They know their value without rescuing anyone. They no longer abandon themselves to belong. They belong to themselves first. Integration is wholeness. In this stage, the empath's light and shadow finally meet. Their sensitivity becomes strength. Their intuition becomes direction. Their boundaries become sacred. They no longer split themselves into who I must be for others and who I am inside. They become one unified self. This is the end of the old identity and the beginning of their true one. The final realization. Integration is not about becoming powerful over others. It is about becoming powerful within. It is the quiet inner knowing. I am responsible for my energy, and only my energy. This realization frees the empath forever. They no longer move through life unconsciously. They move with intention, clear, calm, centered, aware. This is the final stage, not an ending, but a homecoming, a return to the self, the final insight. The empath's dangerous stage was never about destruction. It was never about becoming colder, harder, or detached from humanity. It is, and has always been, about clarity. Clarity of who they are, clarity of what they carry, clarity of what no longer belongs to them. For most of their life, the empath moved through the world with blurred edges, giving away pieces of themselves without noticing. A little of their peace here, a little of their energy there, a little of their spirit to those who took without giving. The final insight is the moment they reclaim every soul fragment they once scattered, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through awakening. They gather themselves back into wholeness, into a form of strength that is quiet yet undeniable, into a presence that is soft yet unshakable, walking with open eyes. At this level, the empath no longer lives unconsciously. Their eyes are open fully. They see reality as it is, not as their hope once painted it. They see people's intentions. They see their own patterns. They see the difference between love and attachment, between compassion and sacrifice, between kindness and self-abandonment. Yet, even with all this clarity, they do not lose their softness. Their heart remains warm. Their empathy remains intact. But now, it is guided by wisdom rather than wounds. Softness paired with strength. The empath's softness no longer leaves them exposed. It becomes a chosen softness, not an unconscious one. A softness surrounded by boundaries, informed by experience, and protected by self-respect. This is the stage where the empath becomes what Jung would describe as a soul that has united its light and shadow. They no longer reject the parts of themselves that were once inconvenient, their anger, their intuition, their boundaries, their truth. They embrace every aspect of who they are, and because of this, they become whole, their final form. Their transformation is not loud, it is calm, it is grounded, it is unmistakably awake. They become the version of themselves that life always intended, wise enough to see through illusions, soft enough to remain human, strong enough to remain untouched by manipulation. This is the empath's final insight. They are no longer controlled by the world. They simply walk through it, fully themselves, untouchable,